Did Saddam Hussein have weapons of mass destruction? No, he did not. We've known that for some time now. So where did the intelligence come from that he was building up his arsenal? Fantastically, the most compelling part came from one obscure Iraqi defector who came in and out of history like a comet. His code name, ironically, was Curveball, and his information became the pillar of the case Colin Powell made to the United Nations before the war. Who is Curveball, and how did he fool the world's elite intelligence agencies? We spent 2 years, traveled to 9 countries, trying to solve the mystery. We talked to intelligence sources, to people who knew Curveball, and to people who worked with him. Curveball's real name has never been made public, nor has any video of him until now. This is Rafid Ahmed Alwan at a Baghdad wedding in 1993, 6 years before he became the key Iraqi source known as Curveball, 6 years before he helped launch the war. Former CIA senior official Tyler Drumheller was an insider and watched Curveball emerge from nowhere. How important was Curveball in taking us to war in Iraq?
If they had not had Curveball, they'd probably found something else, because there was a great determination to do it. But going to war in Iraq, under the circumstances we did, Curveball was the absolutely essential case.
How did Rafid Alwan become Curveball? Our investigation led us to Germany, where in November 1999, Alwan arrived by car and requested asylum at this refugee center outside Nuremberg. The 32-year-old told German intelligence that he was a chemical engineer in Saddam's Iraq, that he had done so well in university he had been made director of this site at Jerf al-Nadaf just outside Baghdad. The Iraqis called it a seed purification plant. In reality, he said, the place was secretly making mobile biological weapons. We've diagrammed how Alwan described the complex to the Germans. He said specially equipped trucks made their way to one end of Warehouse 1, entered doors there, hooked up to hoses and pumps, and brewed biological agents. The germ trucks then exited hidden doors on the other side. Alwan's story fit what Western intelligence agencies feared. Saddam might turn to mobile weapons to evade American bombs. The Germans hid Alwan in Nuremberg, then later in the town of Erlangen. He was given a code name, Curveball. He was interrogated once a week, sometimes twice, for a year and a half. He told the Germans he didn't want to meet with Americans. Only summaries of his debriefings were transmitted to Washington. Still, there were enough details to convince analysts at the CIA.
Curveball was the one piece of evidence where they could say, look at this, if they have this capability, where they can transport biological weapons, anthrax, all these horrible weapons, they can attack our troops with them, they can give them to terrorist groups.
One of Curveball's reports was especially alarming, proof that the agents were lethal, something Curveball claimed he had seen while working at Jerf al-Nadaf.
He said in 1998, working around these tanks, there was even an accident and 12 people were killed, and that got everybody's attention.
So much so that in February 2001, German and American experts met in Munich to discuss Curveball. The Americans revealed they had located Jerf al-Nadaf on overhead imagery. We found it on Google Earth. The imagery was very close to what Curveball had described, with one exception.
If you look at the photos all the way back to 1998, there was a wall that was built there.
A wall.
Like a cinder block wall that nothing could go through.
The wall stood right in front of where Curveball said the trucks went in. CIA analysts who believed in Curveball had an explanation.
There was an idea that it could have been a fake wall.
The analysts believed Iraq had put up a fake wall to make the Americans think no trucks could pass through. The analysts also believed Curveball because he named names. He claimed that Dr. Basil al-Sati, a noted nuclear scientist, was a senior official in Iraq's mobile bioweapons program. British intelligence found Dr. Basil outside of Iraq and pressed him on Jerf al-Nadaf. So did we. Rafid Alwan told German intelligence that you personally were fully involved in the project to use Jerf al-Nadaf for mobile biological weapons.
Big lie.
If something were going on there, if there were...
I would have known, definitely.
There are people in the American intelligence community who believe that seed purification is a cover for biological weapons production.
No. It was really seed purification.
Seed purification?
Yes.
Dr. Basil pointed out If he'd been working on something top secret, why did Saddam let him emigrate from Iraq in 1999? In Germany, Curveball was caught by surprise. He didn't know Dr. Basel had left Iraq. Curveball became less cooperative, more nervous in debriefings. The Germans became uneasy about their source, and they weren't alone. At a CIA meeting in December 2002, the agency's former Central Group Chief, Margaret Hennick, raised her own doubts.
I said, I don't know who this guy is. There's no proof that he is who he is. There's no proof that any of this ever happened. And from my perspective, I just don't think that we should trust this.
The top analyst who believed Curveball brought up the alleged accident at Jerf al-Nadaf and said there were pictures of Curveball in a hazmat suit.
Then I said, how do you know that was him if he's completely covered? Because it could be me. And as God is my witness, she looked at me like a pig looking at a wristwatch. And I thought it was over. And when I went back, I sort of said to the boss, well,
that's it for
I'm
Curveball.
such a genius, we killed that one.
Killed Curveball.
And it was whack-a-mole. I mean, he just popped right back up.
Curveball was still seen as credible at the highest level of the CIA. On December 18, 2002, sources tell 60 Minutes that an urgent request from CIA Director George Tenet was relayed to the head of German intelligence. Tenet was going to meet President Bush in 3 days to discuss the case against Iraq. Tenet wanted the Germans to let Curveball appear on television, or have an American expert debrief Curveball and then go on TV with the story. Failing that, Tenet wanted to use Curveball's information. Answer was requested within 48 hours before Tenet went to the White House. The answer came from Berlin 48 hours later from the German intelligence chief, Dr. August Hanning. In this letter, a copy of which 60 Minutes obtained, Hanning began, "Dear George." He said no to Curveball being interviewed on television or by an American officer. Hanning wrote that Curveball's reporting was plausible and believable, but he added, attempts to verify the information have been unsuccessful. Curveball's reports must be considered unconfirmed, Hanning wrote. If Tenet still wanted to use the information despite these caveats, Hanning said he could if the source was protected. Since the letter was addressed to him directly, we wanted Tenet's response. Through a spokesman, he said he never saw the letter. Former CIA European Division Chief Tyler Drumheller doesn't believe that.
He needs to talk to his special assistants if he didn't see it. And the fact is, he had very good special assistants. I'm sure they showed it to him, and I'm sure it wasn't what they wanted to see.
The next day, December 21st, Tenet met with President Bush and told him making a public case that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction was, quote, a slam dunk. Making that case would be Secretary of State Colin Powell before the United Nations. Powell sent his chief of staff, Colonel Larry Wilkerson, to the CIA to prepare the presentation. Wilkerson says Tenet and his experts brought up Iraq's mobile bioweapons program.
They presented it in a very dynamic, dramatic, we know this is accurate way.
Did it make any difference that the source on this was a first-hand witness?
Certainly did. This was a man who had actually been in the belly of the beast. He had been in the lab. He had been there when an accident occurred. He'd seen people killed. And the implication there was, strong implication, that they weren't killed because of the accident and the explosion. They were killed because they were contaminated. Yes, the source was very credible, as it was presented by the CIA.
And Powell accepted all this on blind faith?
Well, you're the Secretary of State. You're not the head of intelligence for the United States. And you depend on the Director of Central Intelligence to assimilate all the intelligence community's input and give it to you.
Once the speech was ready, Wilkerson felt the section on mobile bioweapons was the crown jewel.
This was the strongest part of the Secretary's presentation.
And Secretary Powell was convinced as well.
I'm convinced he was convinced.
What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence.
On February 5, 2003, Powell told the world that Saddam Hussein had mobile biological weapons. The source? Curveball.
The source was an eyewitness, an Iraqi chemical engineer who supervised one of these facilities. He actually was present during biological agent production runs. He was also at the site when an accident occurred in 1998. 12 technicians died from exposure to biological agents.
Prominently displayed were models of the mobile trucks Curveball had sketched to the Germans. The The most damning evidence in the speech had come from a source no American had interviewed. Just 3 days later, UN inspectors in Iraq visited a suspected WMD location, Jerf al-Nadaf, Curveball's secret site. And what did they find there? A wall, the very wall that had appeared on the overhead imagery back in 2001. Curveball had claimed the mobile bioweapons trucks entered through doors at one end of Warehouse 1.
When the inspectors examined the facility, they found that this was an impossibility.
Jim Corcoran, whose job it was to relay intelligence to the inspectors in Iraq, learned the wall blocked any entrance to the warehouse. As for Curveball's hidden doors at the other end that would allow the trucks to exit,
again, there was a wall there, no doors, and outside there was a stone fence that would have made it impossible for this to have occurred.
Corcoran knew Jerf al-Nadaf was of great importance, so he sent inspectors back 20 days later to take samples to see if any traces of biological agents were there.
They proved negative.
There was nothing there.
Nothing there.
But the inspectors' findings in Iraq made no impact. The war began 3 weeks later. Once the U.S. took over Iraq and started looking for WMD, Curveball's story began to unravel. His university record was located. We obtained a copy. Rafid Ahmed Alwan, a.k.a. Curveball, had claimed to the Germans he graduated at the top of his class in chemical engineering. Well, not quite.
It's 59, 50, 50, 50, 50, 67. I can see all his marks are 50-50s.
Out of 100.
Out of 100, of course.
We showed it to Dr. Basel, Alwan's former boss and a scientist himself. Not a great student.
Never. Never.
Not only that, it turns out Jerf al-Nadaf was a seed purification plant after all. Dr. Basel was the head of production design. Alwan worked for him as an engineer, but only while the facility was being built.
Rafid left few months after we finished Jerf al-Nadaf, which was, I would expect Rafid left sometimes 1995.
He did. We've discovered Alwan then worked at the Babel television production company, where he stole expensive equipment. This is a copy of an arrest warrant that was issued for him. Charges were dropped when Alwan agreed to repay Babel. After that misadventure, the man who invited Alwan to his wedding, Dr. Hilal al-Dulaimi, says Alwan's career took an even more unlikely turn.
He working for cosmetics.
Cosmetics?
Yes. He did some homemade cosmetics.
And as for that biological accident that supposedly killed 12 people at Jerf al-Nadaf in 1998, it never happened. Rafid Alwan wasn't even in Iraq when he said it happened. He had left the country, first traveling to Jordan, then Egypt, then Libya, before making his way to Morocco. From there, Alwan's trail ran cold until he showed up in Germany and became Curveball. The case finally ended in Munich in March 2004 when the Germans allowed a CIA officer to interrogate Curveball.
And the key thing, I think, was the wall. He showed him the pictures of the wall.
To which Curveball said,
"You doctored these pictures," and he said, "No, we didn't." And he said, "We didn't doctor them."
The wall had been built in 1997. Curveball didn't know it existed because he had already left Jerf al-Nadaf.
Curveball was caught. And Curveball said, "I don't think I'm going to say anything else."
The CIA finally acknowledged Curveball was a fraud. But why did Curveball do it? Former CIA insider Tyler Drumheller has an idea.
It was a guy trying to get his green card, essentially, in Germany, playing the system for what it was worth. It just shows sort of the law of unintended consequences.
Rafid Alwan got what he wanted. He's thought to be living in Germany today, most likely under a new name, after pulling off one of the deadliest con jobs of our time.